Wow. You humans of the mighty nation are a friggin' train wreck. One idiot maneuver away from martial law. Fuck. And you're always wishing, well, I wish I had this, I wish I had that. Well, out there right now, somewhere, roaming around, is a cat who can grant your wishes. But do you even know what you would do if your wish got granted? This is a different perspective on wishes. And this is Stories from a Different Perspective by J.L. Sweeney, as told by Argus Truin. That's right, I am Argus Truin. Story number 8. It's your lucky day. Sully walked down the street with his head hung low. He had just lost his job as a stalker at the supermarket and had no idea how he was going to pay his rent or his bills. His fiancée always looked on the bright side, but Sully couldn't see any bright side right now. They were already behind, and it seemed as if the hole just kept getting deeper and deeper. Kicking an empty beer can, he looked up at the sky and mumbled, "Why can't I get lucky just once in my life?" Turning the corner towards his apartment, he almost ran into a man standing in the middle of the sidewalk. He had on a gray derby and a gray suit with blood-red pinstripes. A black cane, with what looked like diamonds set in the handle, was in his left hand. He just stood there staring intently at Sully's face. Sully paused momentarily to look at the man and then began to proceed, veering to the left to avoid a collision. The man stepped to his left and was again in front of Sully. Sully tried to go the other way, but again the man intercepted him. "What's your problem, mister?" Sully growled angrily. The man began to smile at him. The smile had both an irritating and an eerie quality to it. Once again, Sully tried to go around the man, and again the man stepped in front of him. "Get the hell out of my way, man!" Sully shouted, spit flying from his mouth and landing on the man's expensive-looking jacket. The man smiled even wider. Sully doubled his fists and was about to start swinging when the man finally spoke. "Did I hear you correctly a few moments ago?" Sully blinked. "What?" "I asked you if I heard you correctly a few moments ago," the man said. "I have no idea what you're talking about, dude," Sully said, lowering his fists, confused. He really didn't know what the man was talking about. "You said that you wanted to get lucky just once in your life," the man told him, reenacting his voice and body language. Sully didn't like the way the man told him what he had said, and there was no way this guy could have heard him mumbling that far back around the corner. He felt a shiver go down his spine. "Dude, there's no way you could have heard me say that," Sully stated, narrowing his eyes at the man. "Yet I know exactly what you said and how you said it." Sully nodded slowly. "What if I told you I could grant your request?" the man said slyly. The right corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer that caused Sully to hold his breath. "And what would some luck cost me?" Sully asked cautiously. "Well, luck is certainly not cheap," the man replied, "but I think we could work out an arrangement." Sully didn't like the tone the man was using, but felt desperation twisting in his stomach. He was willing to do almost anything to provide for the love of his life. The man was smirking when he held out his hand to shake. Sully grasped the man's hand and instantly felt nauseous. The man gripped tightly, and pain began to pulse through the handshake and into Sully's body. Sully tried to wrench his hand loose, but the man only gripped tighter. He jerked Sully close to him and whispered through clenched teeth, "Understand this, Sully Gertensen. You'll have your lucky day, but should you ever mention our meeting to anyone, you will suffer this pain for years before you die. Do you understand me?" With this last question, the man squeezed Sully's hand with incredible strength, breaking 3 of Sully's fingers. Sully had fallen to his knees and was crying. "Do you understand me?" the man asked again. Sully nodded his head quickly as he could, and the man relinquished his grip. Pulling his hand protectively to his chest, he looked into the man's face and whimpered. Who are you?" The man, smiling, showed even more white teeth. "My name is Eldon Pavazovich, and I shall settle my account with you in due time." The man's smile widened much wider than it should have been able to, and Sully felt cold. It was a horrible smile. The man turned to leave, then paused and reached into his breast pocket. Sully was wiping his eyes when the man tossed something to him. It was a dollar bill. "Get yourself a lottery ticket for today's drawing," the man said, and with that, turned and walked away. Sully watched him until he crossed the street and walked out of sight. Cradling his broken hand, Sully headed for the nearest store. Strangely, the pain in his hand was subsiding. By the time he reached the Quick Mart across from his apartment building, the pain was gone. He flexed his fingers and found they were no longer injured. He was certain that they had been broken because he had felt the bones grinding together and had heard the popping sound as they snapped. He walked into the store and asked for a $1 lottery ticket. "Wow, you're down to the wire, man," the clerk told him. 3 more minutes and I have to shut the machine down. The drawing is in half an hour. You want a quick pick or do you have numbers chosen?" "Quick pick, please," Sully answered. The clerk took his dollar and pressed a few buttons on the machine. In moments, a ticket shot out of the slot, and the clerk handed it to Sully. "Good luck, man." "Thanks," Sully replied, and left the store. He looked at the ticket as he waited at the crosswalk. None of the numbers had any special significance to him. They were 4, 16, 23, 29, 35, 44, and 47. He shrugged his shoulders and crossed the street. Climbing the stairs to his apartment, he could hear Mia singing. He loved it when she sang. Her voice had the most wonderfully soothing quality. He had loved her since they were 7. She always teased him, claiming that she hadn't fallen in love with him until she was 10, but he knew better. He didn't want to tell her about the job, but he knew he had to. He also knew what she would say. "Don't worry about it. We can go looking for another one tomorrow." Her words echoed in his head. Every one of her clouds had a silver lining. "Always remember, souls, even if we have nothing else, we have each other." Her optimism always boosted his spirits, even when they were at their lowest. He unlocked his door and went inside. Mia was there to meet him. She knew by the look on his face. "Tomorrow's another day, souls," she said. "We can start early and have you a job by noon." He nodded, smiled, and went to the TV. Switching it to the correct channel, his eyes widened. The drawing was halfway through and his numbers matched exactly. He held his breath through the next 3 numbers and let out a shout that nearly gave Mia a heart attack. "We won! We won! We won!" he shouted over and over. Grabbing her, he spun her around in the air and showered her with kisses. Mia thought they'd gone over the edge until he showed her the lottery ticket. They hugged each other tightly, and the tears of joy flowed freely down their faces. Gone were the thoughts of Eldon Pavazovich, replaced by visions of $30 million raining down upon their naked bodies in Hawaii or some other vacation spot. Sully had had his lucky day. The next day couldn't come soon enough for Sully and Mia. They were up by 6:30 and ready to go by 7:15. He went to the lottery headquarters to present his winning ticket, and she went to the bank to withdraw their pitiful savings to buy new clothes for both of them. Neither had a worry in the world. After verification, Sully went through the media hype and was presented with the first check. As his cab drew near the bank, he could see police lights flashing and a crowd gathering. A searing pain ripped through his right hand, and he yelped as the cab came to a stop. Fear welled up inside of him, and he kicked the door open and jumped out. Police had blocked off the alley next to the bank and were making way for an ambulance. Sully fought through the crowd to where the police had set up a blockade. He glanced quickly around, looking everywhere for Mia. When he saw one of her shoes near the entrance to the alley, he screamed and tore through the tape, running past officers and into the alley. She lay naked in the pile of garbage. She had been raped and strangled. He fell to his knees and held her softly to his chest. His tears dropped onto her bruised cheeks, and he knew that this was his fault. Again, he felt the pain in his hand. He felt the cold feeling he had felt the previous day and looked around. In the crowd, he saw Pavazovich, who smiled and tipped his hat. "I'll kill you, motherfucker!" he started to shout when he saw Pavazovich give a little flick with his right hand. Before he could finish, he blacked out. He was in the hospital when he woke up. Mia's mother was there, waiting beside his bed. With tears in her eyes, she handed Sully a card. She told him that it had been left by a man with a small round hat and a black cane. Tears came to Sully's eyes as his shaking hands opened the card. "Dear Mr. Gertensen," the card read, "our account has been settled in full. Please enjoy your money. E.P." Sully cried for a long time the day Mia was buried. He vowed that he would not rest until he found Pavazovich and made him pay. Sierra shook her head as she walked out of the interview. She knew by the look on their faces she wasn't going to get the job. If her current boss found out that she had applied with a competitor, she would probably be standing in the unemployment line. Frowning, she walked slowly to her car. She was almost there when she heard footsteps behind her. Without looking back, she reached into her purse and pulled out the can of pepper spray. This stuff was supposed to be powerful enough to subdue a bear. She spun and found herself looking at a well-dressed man, not some thug as she had imagined. He smiled warmly and she relaxed a bit. "Do you think you'll get the job?" he asked. "Who are you?" Sierra asked, not bothering to answer his question. "My name is Eldon Pavazovich. Do you think you'll get the job?" "Not a chance," she replied, shaking her head. "What if I could assure you that you will get the job and become very successful?" he asked, his smile widening. "What do you mean?" Sierra wanted to know. "Simple. We make a deal, you get the job and success, and I get whatever I want, whenever I want. I have a husband that I'm happily married to. Thanks anyway." She backed up a few steps and reached for her keys. "Ah, Sierra, if you think that it's sex that I'm after, you couldn't be any more incorrect. Then what do you want?" "I never really do quite know until a given situation arises," he said. "I can see how you could get me the job, but I don't see how you can make me successful." "Well," he said, turning to leave, "I can't help you if you don't want my help. Good day." He began to walk away. Wait. What do I have to do?" He stopped with his back to her. "I believe a simple hug will suffice as a bond to our agreement." Sierra walked to him and he turned around. He smiled and held out his arms. Slowly she stepped into his embrace, and when her arms were around his back, he began to squeeze. She felt her breath escape from her lungs and tried to get away. He held on tightly, and she could feel ribs cracking in her chest. "Stop! Please! Stop!" she grunted. Intense nausea and pain racked her body. She was on the verge of blacking out when he began whispering in her ear. "Listen very closely, Sierra, for I shall only tell you this one time. You will get your job and you will be very, very successful. However, if you ever mention our meeting to anyone, you will suffer this pain for many years before I finally allow you to die. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she panted out the last of the air in her lungs. He gave her a final squeeze and she felt ribs break. "Our account shall be settled in due time, Sierra. Enjoy your new position," he whispered, and let her drop. She fell to the pavement and gasped for breath. Her broken ribs hurt her so badly that she had to try to breathe slowly. She tilted her head and saw Pavazovich walk down a row of parked cars and disappear. After a few moments, the pip, 3, 2, 1. After a few moments, the pain began to subside, and she sat up. Tears rolled down her cheeks. What had she done? What kind of deal had she made? She took a deep breath and noticed that her ribs did not hurt anymore. Drying her eyes, she got to her feet and was about to unlock her car when a woman rushed out of the building. "Mrs. Naninga, I'm glad I caught you before you left. The interview board has asked me to inform you that you have been chosen to be the new head of marketing. Congratulations. I'm Kelly Mercer, your new assistant." Sierra couldn't believe it. Maybe Pavazovich had known all along. Perhaps he was just some corporate sicko getting his kicks. She couldn't explain the pain and the broken ribs, but joy overrode her suspicions. The drive home was absolutely perfect. No traffic, her favorite songs on the radio, and she hit every stoplight when it was green. Her husband was thrilled for her, and once her children were not fighting, maybe Pavazovich... Fuck, I did it again. In 3, 2, 1. "Mrs. Naninga, I'm glad I caught you before you left. The interview board has asked me to inform you that you have been chosen to be the new head of marketing. Congratulations. I'm Kelly Mercer, your new assistant." Sierra couldn't believe it. Maybe Pavazovich had known all along. Perhaps he was just some corporate sicko getting his kicks. She couldn't explain the pain and the broken ribs, but joy overrode her suspicions. The drive home was absolutely perfect. No traffic, her favorite songs on the radio, and she hit every stoplight when it was green. Her husband was thrilled for her, and for once her children were not fighting. Maybe Pavazovich did have something to do with her change in luck. In just 3 months, Sierra had doubled profits for her new company. Her old boss had called her 3 times trying to get her to come back. She enjoyed the feeling of revenge. She hadn't been well treated there. Everyone in the company knew her, and she felt wonderful. Immense popularity had come with her success, and she was invited to many corporate parties. She even felt that someday she might just be able to make it to the top. Mrs. Naninga, her secretary buzzed. Yes? There's an emergency call on line 2. Thank you, Kelly. Sierra picked up the phone and pressed line 2. She could hear people speaking in the background. Hello? Her voice wavered. Mrs. Naninga, this is Corporal Smith with the Washington State Patrol. There's been an accident. Sierra dropped the phone. Sudden waves of pain gripped her ribs. She hadn't thought of Pavazovich for 3 months, and now his face was all she could see in her mind. She picked up the phone again. What kind of accident, Corporal? Sierra asked, tears already forming at the corners of her eyes. A drunken driver hit your husband's car, ma'am. We need you to come down to the hospital. Are they all right? Are they hurt? What hospital? She asked without waiting for the answers. St. August Medical Center, ma'am, the trooper told her. I'll be right there, she said, dropping the phone and missing the cradle. She grabbed her purse and ran for the door. As Sierra ran into the emergency... okay, in 3, 2, 1. As Sierra ran into the emergency room, she saw a familiar face. Pavazovich stood near a nurse's station, smiling at her. She almost stopped, but her family was more important. Several police officers and a doctor stopped talking when she made it to the emergency room nurse's station. They looked at her, their faces filled with pity. She began to shake her head. Disbelief, then realization flooded through her. Her eyes rolled back and she fell. When she awoke, a doctor handed her a card that had been given to him by a gentleman with a cane. It read, Dear Sierra Naninga, congratulations on your successful new marketing position. I see that you have turned your company around in only 3 months. Very impressive. Our contract has been fulfilled. Best wishes and a long life. EP. Sierra started screaming. Buck fell to one knee. This man, who was half his size, was crushing his hand. He grit his teeth and glared in the eyes of the man. The man squeezed harder, and Buck felt the bones in his hand start to give. His eyes watered, but he never made a sound. The man smiled, showing his teeth. Buck had never seen teeth so white. Giving one more, slight squeeze that broke Buck's little finger, the man let go. Without saying another word, he turned and began to leave. Pausing, he reached into a pocket and retrieved something. Buck stood, and the man tossed a baseball over his shoulder. Buck caught it with his good hand. Give that to your son. Oh, and enjoy the season. Buck watched as the man walked down the driveway, hung a left, and disappeared around the corner. Still amazed at the strength the man had displayed, Buck looked at the ball. Nothing unusual about it, just a slightly used old baseball. He turned and headed toward the house. Probably wouldn't hurt to have Ike throw a few pitches today. The draft was tomorrow, and Buck wanted him to be in prime position. Condition. Fuck. And 3, 2, 1. Buck watched as the man walked down the driveway, hung a left, and disappeared around the corner. Still amazed at the strength the man had displayed, Buck looked at the ball. Nothing unusual about it, just a slightly used old baseball. He turned and headed toward the house. It probably wouldn't hurt to have Ike throw a few pitches today. The draft was tomorrow, and Buck wanted him to be in prime condition. Buck turned on the radar and crouched behind the plate. He had always wanted Ike to be a catcher, but really didn't care whether he played as long as he played. Ian refused to play. He said Buck pushed too hard. It was okay, though. Ike would be the pro athlete of the family. Ian could do as he wished. Buck wasn't even sure what Ian did want to do. Ike went from the windup and threw a low inside corner fastball. It stung Buck's hand, making him look at the clock. 90 miles an hour. well up from his usual mid-80s. Buck threw the ball that Pavlovich had given him out to Ike, who fired in another fastball, this one high and away. This pitch also gave Buck some sting, 92. Buck thought of Pavlovich and the baseball. Thwack, 94. How could this be happening? 97. Ike had never thrown over 90 before. 99. This was incredible. 99. Buck wondered if it could be considered cheating. 99. It didn't matter. Only his son's happiness mattered. Buck didn't know that Ike only played because he thought it might be what Buck wanted him to do. 100 miles an hour. Ike couldn't believe it either. He really couldn't believe it when the phone rang the next morning, informing him that he had been chosen in the first round. Ike went 24-0 his rookie season. He threw an unheard of 6 perfect games. Merchandise endorsements followed, and he quickly became the most highly paid player in baseball history. Training camp would have to wait. Ian's graduation was more important. Besides, it looked like stormy weather, and they couldn't practice in the rain. Ike knew that he would have his pay docked, but he wasn't too concerned. He had more money than he knew what to do with. He sat in the front row with Buck, watching Ian receive his awards. Ian had graduated at the top of his Harvard class, and it was a shame that Ike was more proud of him than Buck. When it was time for Ian to give his valedictorian speech, a slight rain began to fall. It came harder the further into his speech he got. As he neared the end, lightning began to flash, and people began to leave. At thank you, there was a loud crack, and in a flash of light, Ian disappeared. Bits of his gown lay scattered about in small, smoldering piles. The podium he had been speaking at had been split in two. Buck's jaw was hanging. He began looking around for Ian when he spied Pavlovich waving at him from across the courtyard. Pavlovich tipped his hat and smiled and walked around the corner of a building. Buck never saw him again. At Ian's funeral dinner, someone handed Buck a card. Dear Buck Peterson, what a wonderful season your son had. He seems to be fitting into the life of fame and fortune quite nicely. Our contract has been fulfilled. Enjoy your son's career. Remember, lightning never strikes the same place twice. E.P. Buck hung his head and cried. Please, Mr. Pavlovich, Ricky whined. She won't tell anyone. You're right, Ricky. She won't. Eldon began staring at Shelley. His eyes began flashing bright red. Shelley began wailing, and wisps of smoke began to appear around her ears and mouth. Her cries were suddenly cut off as her body melted and splashed to the floor. Ricky looked back and forth between the puddle of Shelley and Eldon. Please, God, please don't do that to me, he shouted. I am not God, Eldon said slowly. And don't worry, Ricky, I'm not going to melt you. Don't you remember the deal we made a few weeks ago? We wanted wealth and a beautiful woman. I made it happen for you. You were never supposed to speak of our meeting. You told poor Shelley there, and now look what's happened to her. No melting for you, Ricky. You felt the pain that sealed our contract. You broke that contract, Ricky. Eldon shrugged. Now you must pay the consequences. What are you going to do to me? Ricky whined again. Pavlovich smiled an evil smile. Ricky hated his smile. Fine! Do your worst, Ricky hissed at him. Without Shelley, I don't have anything to live for anyway. Eldon smiled until his whole face was a smile. Drool began to drip from the corners of his mouth, and he walked toward Ricky. Ricky began jerking and kicking, trying to get the ropes loose. His chair bucked, and he nearly fell over, but Eldon caught it. Setting the chair right and ignoring Ricky's protests, he dribbled some of his drool onto Ricky's right hand. Smoke began to pour from the hand, and Ricky felt as if his flesh were burning. He screamed, and Eldon, whose smile was now gone, nodded in appreciation. Let this be a lesson to you, Pavlovich said. Never break your contracts. He turned his back to Ricky and walked into the shadows out of sight. Ricky screamed long into the night. Each time it felt like the pain was about to stop, it renewed with an even greater intensity, as it was if he was feeling it for the first time. When it was too intense, he would black out, waking to find Pavlovich standing over him. Eldon would check on him from time to time, sometimes inflicting pain in other ways other than the burning drool. Ricky suffered for 2 months before Ellen gave him an opportunity to be released from his broken contract. "At least I'll never have to see your face again, Pavazovich," Ricky said. "You just never know, Ricky." He didn't even flinch when Ricky pulled the trigger on the shotgun, spraying his nice suit with blood, hair, and gray matter. Try to behave, humans. It ain't that fucking hard. We're done!